So 2021 was an eventful year. We had the ultimate climbing test, we had groundbreaking fingerboard routines, and climbing hit the big stage. In this video, we're going to break down what we think were the biggest trends of 2021. And as it's Christmas and we're feeling generous, we're going to give away some free training equipment. So watch through to the end and find out how to enter. First one is Emils hangboarding 2 times a day for 30 days. As coaches here at Lattice, this was a massive one for us because we got loads of questions about, wow, have you seen this? Is this what I should be doing? How do I get started? So let's do a quick review of what happened in this video and what we can learn from it. The first thing is that this paper was about connective tissue adaptation in the tendons and ligaments. The training protocol that Emil and his brother came up with was principally based on the end of this paper, which was titled Science-Based Recommendations for Training to Improve Tendon Health and Performance. This was actually a really great paper by a researcher called Keith Barr, and his work actually goes into a lot of the practices that many PTs and physiotherapists use in their day-to-day work. In fact, as coaches, we've based our own training on this type of research because injury prevention is so important to us. For more scientific review of this particular paper and Emil's training approach, I'd really recommend going over to Hooper's Beta and watching his video over there. So what was the protocol? Well, it was fairly simple. It was hangboarding 2 times a day. This was made up of 10 hangs, each at 10 seconds with 50 seconds rest. So 10 minutes of work. And this was done in a variety of grip positions, from half crimp to open free and pocket hangs. This was nothing that new. Perhaps to a lot of people, hangboarding twice a day was quite a new concept, but we do know some physios which already use this approach. What was such a standout point of this video was the strength gains that we saw Emil make in a 30-day period. So what are the numbers? Well, Emil went from hanging for 5 seconds with plus 40 kilos to hanging the same time with plus 67 kilos. This is an impressive 24% improvement in strength over just 30 days. However, it's also worth looking at the strength improvements Felix, his brother, had made. He mentioned that he had been doing this protocol for a couple months and he had made plus 10 kilos in his strength gains. However, Felix's main point was that he now felt a lot healthier in his fingers and less tweaky than before. This is typically what we would expect from the protocol that was being done. It was low intensity, high volume, and giving a great stimulus to the tendons and connective tissue. And remember, the paper we're referencing was about connective tissue adaptation, not the adaptation to the contractile fibers or the muscle, which is where the strength is primarily being generated. Emil's strength gains, however, were of course really good. So what's going on there? Well, the first question I have is, would Emil have made these same strength gains if he did a different fingerboarding protocol, something more familiar like max hangs? Something I noticed at the beginning of this video is Emil starts by saying he has been mainly doing campus training for his finger strength work. So we might make the assumption he wasn't really doing fingerboarding before this fingerboarding protocol. We know in a large part, if you start training a new training stimulus, there's going to be a big learning effect that you get better at doing the skill simply because you're learning how to do it better. This is probably what happened, at least partly in that strength gain, because he wasn't fingerboarding before this protocol. We must also consider that Emil is an 8B+ boulderer. He's really strong. And actually the scores we see in his strength test at the end of this 30-day period is pretty typical for that level of boulderer. So was he simply just de-recruited when he did his first test because he hadn't touched a fingerboard in a while? So what can we learn from this video moving into 2022? Well, the protocol that Emil was using here was actually a great form of training. Many physios are going to use this in the rehabilitation process. Maybe it's double day loading, maybe it's loading once a day, but the idea is that frequent and low intensity loading is a really good way to get adaptation in the connective tissue. It's really good to see Emil contributing to the knowledge of the climbing community and showing that high intensity fingerboarding is not the only method of progressing in your climbing. However, we need to remember that this is not a substitute for high intensity fingerboarding, it's a totally different thing. We cannot do this level of fingerboarding every day or 2 times a day indefinitely. At some point, if we want to gain strength in the muscles and elicit a neural adaptation, it's important that we use higher intensity loading. We cannot do this with a high frequency as Emil was doing in his video. This is where the principle of periodization comes into our training. In an off season, the kind of thing Emil was doing might work great, but it does need to be phased out, and we need to use all sorts of methods of fingerboarding to get the best results in our climbing. Next up, we have the 9C test. Now, this was a massive one, and technically Magnus brought this in at the end of 2020, but coming into 2021, it seems like every big YouTuber was doing their own version of the 9C test. The original video is now sitting at something like 1.5 million views, but how legitimate is the 9C test, and can you use it to inform your training in 2022? First, what makes up the 9C test? Well, if you don't know this already, then you may not have been on YouTube in the past year. Basically, the first part is a finger strength test, 20 mil edge, as much weight as you can for 5-second hold. The second part is a pull-up strength test, as much added weight as possible for 1 repetition. The third part is a test of core strength and endurance, either using some form of L-sit and then progressing to levels of lever lift. After that, and the last part, is hanging on a bar for as long as possible. This is an endurance test of the forearms. You then accumulate points for how well you do in each individual tests, and your total number of points will then line up with a grade from anywhere between 6A and 9C. Well, are these good measures? Well, on their own, yes, but maybe apart from the hanging on a bar thing. We know this just isn't specific to climbing, at least not specific enough to really inform you of your endurance. Even some of the earliest research into the energy systems of climbing found out that grip dynamometry in the traditional way did not correlate with climbing performance, and these researchers had to develop a climbing specific grip test to be able to make that connection. So does the 9C test correlate with grade? Well, I don't actually know the definitive answer to this. In an interview of Tom, I believe they said it was pretty much based on estimates, and now so many people have done it, it would be nice to actually see them collect this data and then perhaps refine that model to see if there is any correlation with grade. My guess is this test will just simply never correlate well with climbing grade. It's too simplistic and maybe not specific enough to give us that kind of information. So is it a good test? Well, yes and no. The yes, because it's actually really simple to do, and that's part of the hurdle of doing any form of assessment. Some amazing assessments or research-based tests are so hard to do that many of the practitioners actually working with clients or the athletes themselves never get around to doing. They pretty much stay in the laboratory with this gold standard test, which no one else does. The test falls down with what it can tell you about your climbing. It does try and take 4 different areas of your climbing, but even in this range, it's not going to tell you much about what you should work on in terms of your strengths and weaknesses. Even the most extensive assessments needs a coach's eye to be able to put these results into context. So if you're serious about using an assessment to inform your training, do one with a coach's input, because the feedback is often more useful than the numbers themselves. The next one is the home training revolution. So of course, this mainly kicked off in 2020, but come 2021, we saw a lot of climbing walls open and some things start to return to normal, but something had changed. People were now still more involved in their home training than ever before. This is probably due to a few things. We definitely know that, at least here in the UK, home boards and home training facilities cropped up everywhere. The home training revolution was of course helped along with the emergence of more and more home training tools. And to help you with your own home training, in this episode we're giving away a free lifting pin and mini bar. Watch until the end and we'll show you how to enter for that competition. It was an important year for diversity with increased representation of non-binary and trans climbers. Patagonia released their film They/Them about Law Saborin. This is perhaps the first high-profile, high-budget film made about a non-binary climber. Law has climbed a 514 trad. Law is currently working with coach Maddie Cope to continue their hard climbing into 2022 and beyond. We recently had a great interview with Taylor Parsons on the Jam Crack podcast. Niall Grimes did a really good job of letting Taylor tell her story. This was a super honest and candid interview of her life, transition, and mental health. The number of out high-level LGBTQ+ climbers is increasing. Pro climber Jordan Cannon came out in May 2021, and Anna Hazelnut has been making big news with sending an E9 in the south of England with Once Upon a Time in the southwest. Anna will also be working with Lattice coach Flo Tilley to be sending more hard routes into 2022. Of course, we had some really hard climbing in 2021. We had Daniel Woods making the second 9.8 in the world with Return of the Sleepwalker. We had Stefano Ghisolfi and Sean Bailey doing repeats of Alex Migos's Bibliography. Yanni Gambre got an on-site of the 8C route Fisheye in Oliana, and Laura Rigora got an ascent of a 9B/plus route called Erebor. Runners-up for big events in 2021. Number 1, Dave McLeod wins the award for Most Wholesome Climbing Video with Keystone. In at number 2, we also have Dave McLeod for Longest YouTube we all want to watch but don't have enough time for. Number 3, fingerboarding seems to have become its own sport, with Yves and Yuki being the ones to beat. Number 4, climbing seems to have merged with parkour, and even the crack climbers are getting involved. Number 5, there was this really big competition in Tokyo, and climbers actually paid to watch it. We haven't forgotten about the competition giveaway. If you want to win a mini bar and lifting pin, all you need to do is like and subscribe and comment below with your favorite moment of 2021, which we haven't mentioned. So that rounds up 2021. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next year.